Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste.
We are happy to continue today on Conscious Reincarnation, Part 2. And we will delve on how we can carry our current growth of consciousness deliberately in our next incarnation. And during our conversation, you may post your questions in the chat box on YouTube, or you may address your questions beforehand at our email ID, integralstudies.in@gmail.com. We will take first question of Nikhil.
Yeah, just before that, I'll make a
Okay,
reminder for the
summarize.
announcement.
Oh,
As we had already announced last week, we have two talks by Mark Oburn. Last week it was on Sunday at Savitri Bhavan, which was the first part on the theme of reincarnation and past life memories. And tomorrow, Sunday, the same time, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. in Pondicherry at Hotel Shenbaga is the second part of the talk, which is on the same theme of reincarnation, but this second part will focus on the actual process of how the subtle body separates at the time of death, the passage of transition between lives, and then the reincarnation process and the mechanism of the reconnection. So it's quite fascinating because much of this is drawn from his own direct experience, and which I've always reminded our viewers that everything that he is describing matches perfectly with what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have been stating of these processes. There are, of course, details which he provides which are quite fascinating. And he's always clear that what he's sharing is what he, within the realm of his experience. There may be more things possible which are not in his realm, but that's one. Second, the last time we released his Mark's second book, translated into English, and it is called Tempest, 30 Centuries of Shared Lives. This is available on the Deepti Publications website, and I've put the link for that also up. And we had taken up the theme last time of reincarnation and what Sri Aurobindo has to say about this topic, particularly from the context of continuity of lives, of consciousness across lives. And we had taken the text from chapter 22 of the Life Divine, which also link is there. And there I had commented last time that I had put a link to the series of my talks on this particular text. Unfortunately, the link was wrong. It was through the YouTube studio. I have corrected that link both for the previous talk and for this one. So those of you who had trouble accessing that link, please use the new link which is there. Otherwise, you can simply go to the Integral Studies YouTube channel, go to the playlists and just look for the Life Divine. And within that, the first, I think 9.5 actually, of the talks are on this topic. So this is just a quick correction and an update. We can take up the question.
and we wait you all to come to Shembaga tomorrow morning. So from Nikhil, we have a question. In his letters on yoga, Sri Aurobindo writes that after death, body, life, and mind are dissolved. The psychic being carries the spiritual essence of all kinds of experiences. Sri Aurobindo says in those letters, in such condition, please throw light how trauma, etc. are carried into next incarnation.
I think this was already answered in great detail in our previous discussion. So at first I was surprised why the question came, and then I realized that there's an important clarification which needs to be made. It is not that all traumas are carried over. I think this we need to highlight. It's not as if everything that happens in this life now becomes a trauma into the next, but you have forgotten the memory of what caused it. No, that's the wrong idea. What I said, what I tried to communicate was that certain things which could cause trauma at a deeper layer, impacting the psychic being, the inner mind, or the inner vital, to the extent that they have left an imprint there, and to the extent that the soul retains that part, that portion of the substance of mind and vital, or that aspect of the personality which underwent the trauma, to the extent that portion is retained, the trauma of that portion also may be carried over, if it so chooses to retain, or if it's part of that package. In which case, again, the trauma does not have to happen every time in every life. When that aspect or that portion of consciousness or experience is brought forward by the soul, then with that experience and the imprint of that experience, with all the positive content, the so-called negative content of the trauma also would be present. Now, I'm saying so-called negative because from the soul's point of view, these are not positive and negative in the way that we understand them. The soul's value system is so different that you may say a life of suffering in your surface personality or somebody else looking at you. And the soul would say, what a life of great triumph and achievement and realization of this heroism, of this courage, of this ability to survive, to overcome, etc. So the suffering is a more superficial appearance. The achievement of the soul's growth is its reference. Sometimes even the two could be proportionate. The greater the difficulty is, the greater the sense of fulfillment and achievement, because that's when you have grown so much more. If it was an easy life, there is very little you could do potentially, or maybe you did grow a lot, but the growth was somewhat limited by the fact that it was a smooth, narrow growth. The fact of struggle and challenge forces that to become rich, diverse, complex, powerful, and so on. So from the soul's point of view, the values are very different. So I take an example which Mark narrates in his first book, which is also put up, which is also on the Deepti Publications website. And in this first book, which we had released last year, he narrates how his life in Greece as a soldier, the imprint of that is very strong in this life, for a reason which is obvious once you get to know him a little bit, because in this life also he's a warrior par excellence. But now not a physical battle, but in the domain of action, in the domain of communication of ideas and helping people and so on. But that imprint of that life is very strong in this life. And he says this in his book also. The memory there, it's not about how you grew up, what kind of food you ate, none of that matters. It is that as a soldier, the way you lived for honor. In the book, Mark comments, today humanity has absolutely no idea of what that honor is, of what it means to live for honor. A glimpse of this you get in some of the Japanese movies, where for the sake of honor, you will even kill yourself or die for the country or die for a word given, etc. We see glimpses of this in our stories in the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, particularly in the Mahabharata, where you have the Kshatriya temperament strongly represented, where someone will say, I know you are right, but I have given my word to X, and now I have to live by my word, even if it means doing wrong and suffering and dying as a consequence. And so there is this limitation which comes to the honor, because what you see there in the honor is a declining phase of the Kshatriya temperament. What you see also sometimes in the Japanese cinema is a fallen Kshatriyahood in the samurai tradition. It's fallen because already for honor you are willing to even forget what is more true. Occasionally, of course, you see in those cinemas the higher potential of honor, but much of what has come through and survived in humanity in these racial memories or in these ancient stories is already much reduced. So Mark's observation is quite interesting when he says today people have no idea of what it meant, but his memory of that life was he is fighting for some cause, he is betrayed, and as a consequence he is thrown into this prison in a hole where he falls and gradually dies. I don't know, from the injury, from starvation, whatever form it takes, he dies. But he dies clinging to that ideal for which he fought the whole life. This, for the soul's experience, is, wow, what an achievement, what an extraordinary realization and power and fulfillment of its courageous, heroic and honor aspect. And it is something of that which he has drawn strongly into this life for the purpose of the work that the soul wants to do in this incarnation. With it comes the memory of that suffering or struggle of the death. But from the soul's point of view, it's not one of suffering. It is one of accomplishment, of achievement. But if you now bring that memory down to the more superficial layer of the body consciousness, and if there is a memory of that, oh, I died, and the pain I experienced and the suffering I had, that could be carried over and say, oh, it was a very painful or struggle of death. But that's not the soul value. So what I'm trying to show is the trauma is a secondary content to the larger experience, which from the soul's point of view may not even be traumatic. There would be trauma experiences from the soul's value when a life is cut short, as for example you will see during the wars, when people are taken prisoners, put through extreme torture and killed through the most gruesome ways. Something that still happens today in Africa, in Europe, in large parts of the world. It's still quite common. I just saw yesterday, it's a bit of a digression, but I just saw a couple of days ago, I think it was in Ghana, a jail with 4,500 people. And there was a breakout. Most of them were men, most of them escaped. On the way, as they were escaping, there were about 180 women. They raped them, battered them, almost beat them to death, and then ran away. Now, I would have given this as an example of the animality of humanity still present in large parts. How crude, how ugly, how perverse. But those women, the suffering they went through, that will remain as an imprint if something of that life is retained for its future use. Very likely, if that is the condition of those women also, if they also belonged to that same value system, and very likely they were in jail because of that, then very likely the largest part of the soul's imprint of the vital and mental nature would be dissolved and discarded. And perhaps nothing remains. But at the time of transition, at the time of leaving, if there is the soul looks back and says, oh, that was a terrible experience, some imprint of that might still remain associated with that life. And in a future life, let's say that woman might still find, when facing certain situations which align with something of that trauma event, somehow I don't trust these men, or under those circumstances I feel somehow uncomfortable. And that may still remain. If some portion of the vital, mental, on the inner layer which was affected by this has been retained and transferred into the next. So the mechanism of transfer you have to understand, not all traumas are transferred, only those which have affected the soul's evolution. Because in this case they died, some of them died in a very horrible condition under rape and being battered to death. That might leave an imprint in the soul's consciousness in some form. And so these are the kinds of traumas which can be transferred. You must understand, again I quote from Sri Aurobindo, but in a paraphrased way. He says that self is always free. But the soul, he says, is limited and can suffer. This phrase, can suffer, you will find, he says, because it is limited. And it is working through limitation to develop its own greater potential. And so in that passage, the soul, psychic being, can also suffer. And it is these things which would be the trauma that could be carried over, not everything. So this is a correction for taking Nikhil's question into account. We go to the next question.
From Tutun, will not the memory of past reincarnation lead to tiredness and fatigue? Just hearing the 30,000 years of lifetimes of Mark made me feel exhausted. And from Suraj, we have a comment. I heard that Tibetan Buddhist master is reincarnating himself in the same tradition since beginning of tradition.
Okay. So the first part of the question is about the memories. It says here 30 centuries of shared lives, but this is regarding a person that he will speak of, somebody that he was married to in an earlier part of his life, now separated. But that is 30 centuries, that's just 3,000 years. But Mark speaks of recalling lives going back 30,000 years since he came incarnated on earth. Not all lives. Interesting. So this is a question one could ask. Why not all lives? Isn't it? If it was a purely automatic memory, as he says that he has made no effort to try to recall, the memories just came. In fact, it's a big part in our private conversation. He says it's a big problem for him to hold back the memories. If he simply opens and the memories just come pouring through. But not all lives. And this is a question one could ask. So obviously, in the soul's preparation for this particular incarnation, certain personalities developed in certain lives have been brought forward. Others have been withheld, withdrawn. One could, by special effort, reach out to them, but that would be more difficult. So things relevant are brought forward. Now, out of those 30,000 years, I don't know how many lives, but because those relevant have been brought forward, those are more accessible, and there he has this overwhelming sense of the memories or details even pouring through. So yes, you're right. If you had to go back and try to remember all those things, it would be pointless. In fact, Sri Aurobindo describes precisely this, and we will come to that text a little later, probably later today or maybe the next time, where he says, if the whole purpose is the development of being across lives, then the prolonging the old temperament, character, and its memory would be a great hindrance. I'll just read a fragment of the text. He says, a clear and detailed memory of past loves, hatreds, rancors, attachments, connections would be equally a stupendous inconvenience, for it would bind the reborn being to a useless repetition or a compulsory continuation of his surface past and stand heavily in the way of his bringing out new possibilities from the depths of the being. So yes, this is true. And this is the reason why either the soul chooses to withhold or nature herself intervenes, or there are higher beings who assist in the reincarnation, and there's a mechanism to withdraw, withhold. I know a case. This was the case in which Panditji, my teacher, narrated, MP Pandit. His mother used to love a particular prayer. And then it happened in the family that his sister's granddaughter, when she was very young, 2 or 3 years old, suddenly began to chant that particular prayer spontaneously. And so it seemed that she was the reincarnation of his mother in the same family. And he went and reported it to the mother. The mother showed great concern, and she said, oh, this should not be, it will interfere with the development. And she intervened, and that memory stopped, and the child grew normally without that carryover. Now, this would be helpful. There's another example I'm going to quote from Mark, describing in his new book, Tempest, where he says that in the very advanced civilizations, which is what he remembers from while he was on another planet, the attachments, the richness of emotions with regard to relationships are so intense, so much more complex and rich, that during certain kinds of training, they become a hindrance. So they have to actually go through a process of deliberately choosing to erase or suppress certain memories to free you from those memories in order to be able to move forward. It's an interesting observation. It resonates with certain truths of that kind of civilization. But this is just to say that it is innate to the nature of evolution that we don't want to keep all memories. Nevertheless, in this case, certain memories have been held. And this is a conversation I had with Mark. I asked him, well, doesn't it bother you? He says, yes, of course. When first the memories came back, he was struggling with it because the memories were as vivid as if he just lived them yesterday. It was affecting his ability to function normally. He went to psychiatrists and they had no solution. And he describes in the book how he found the solution which helped him to free from the trauma. Nevertheless, the trauma is very much present when he thinks about it, when he remembers, when he relives those memories. So I asked him, well, why do you do it? He said, it's just something which I have decided in this life that I'm going to try to pull back every little detail of every memory that I can get. Now, I don't understand the full scope of why it is so, but it seems to be part of the nature and purpose for him to be able to do something. I don't know. I can't say more about that. But yes, you're right. You don't want that kind of memory because it also corresponds to a grade of consciousness which is so much more inferior, that bringing them back will also bring back the traumas which they will recreate, but also the lower grades of consciousness and experience that they are associated with, and perhaps even problems, including addictions, for example, would tend to pop up because the same force would come forward. Fortunately, this does not happen to most of us, because our vital and mental individuality is so little integrated with the psychic. It is so little individualized that the bulk of the memories are dissolved with the loss of those vital and mental bodies when they are dissolved. It's only in rare cases when the incarnation is rapid and a large content of the mental or vital substance has been carried over that some tendency of those memories might still come through. And even then, the soul could intervene to withhold. I give an example of this, which is my own personal case, where from the early childhood, although I had been told about what the mother has said about the past incarnation, my instinctive, deep sense, and I'll say it came from the soul's influence, was to not have anything to do with the past, not just previous life, but all lives of past. To not have anything to do even with inheritance of lineages of the family. Even to not identify with the community and the tradition and the state and the family identities which came with that. To completely isolate from all that so that I might be fully free for the future that needs to be created with no imprint of the past to whatever extent possible. Now I'm articulating in so many words what in the deep impulse coming from the soul's influence was just this. It was a state of being, future, all the future, only the future, block, close, push back, anything to do with past or heredity or inheritance of value systems of family. And there are beautiful things. I could have looked back and say, I belong to such and such lineage or these. No, nothing, none of that. And so it reflected on the surface by kind of a shrinking or even a disdain towards anything which had to do with heredity or with family, etc., identities. It's only much later when a certain spiritual foundation was sufficiently stabilized that now the personality was largely organized around this foundation, that it was as if that block just vanished, just like that. Within a few days, poof, it was gone. Not that it wants to look back. It's just that the block was removed. Now it's like it doesn't matter. If I want, I could turn, look, identify with a drawback, but what's the point? It doesn't interest me. Certain things are curious. There's a curiosity, but superficially, to the extent if somebody narrates certain things, I'll say, interesting. But I would not go to ask, hey, can you tell me more about this? It doesn't matter. But what is interesting is the block was deliberately put forward and then withdrawn at a point when it was no more relevant. And that's it. It could be as simple as that, and you may or may not be conscious on the surface, but this is how it works. So this is regarding Tutun's question. Regarding Suraj's question about Tibetan Buddhist masters reincarnating in this way, I will share a position regarding this. Again, it might be controversial, so take it as my opinion and nothing else if you don't like what it conveys. Any such attempt to bind a child because he's a special reincarnate will be harmful to the evolution of the child. In Mark's case, there was a spontaneous recall. It's not as if somebody says, hey, you are reincarnated, now we're going to treat you as special. The memories just came. And I give another example of Dina Merriam. Some of you have heard her speak on or read her book also. I don't have it right now with me. Where spontaneously she had recall of the past memories. And when she first shared them with me, I encouraged her to write because I could detect it was the soul memory. When she began to write, she tuned in as if to the Akashic imprint and could get much more details which were not part of the soul memory, but they were confirmed in the soul memory. But in these cases, some element of the strong individualization of the vital and mental body which was developed in those past lives would hold, would carry over, or would allow bringing forward certain elements of those memories to the extent chosen. But they happened spontaneously. What is happening in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is they look for that so-called master. Look for the child, and having recognized the child, they interfere in its natural development, separate the child from the parents to the extent needed, now put him in the Lama monastery training, make him into a big Lama, and the child grows up. And I had occasion. Again, I hope it does not bother too many. I had occasion to be in a space where they had this. It was in one of the Lama monasteries. And there was one child, and uh, Lama was carrying the child everywhere. The child would point to that flower, and the fellow would run as if he's doing some great sacred task of taking the child to the flower. Then after a point, whimsically, the child would get bored and point to that, and the big Lama would run with the child. I asked, what is this happening? They said, oh, he is a reincarnation of some famous Lama. And what I saw was a child being brought up in a way which would be completely spoilt in his surface personality. The reality is, in most cases, the Lama himself does not remember the past lives. He's being told, you are so and so, now you better take charge and replay that role that you had. And this is harmful. It would be a different thing if the memories came back spontaneously. In the nature of the development, you will see this in further text that Sri Aurobindo will explain, that we don't want the same personality to form. You want something new to form. And if at that point you're trapped from childhood, you didn't have a choice. Somebody came and said, hey, you are so-and-so reincarnated, and now we take you and put you back on that chair so that you will play that role. It's going to be extremely harmful. Now, of course, you could say that that's the tradition. But I'm saying that tradition and that belief system and that intrusion in the child's freedom is not healthy for the normal evolution. I had occasion to also interact, without naming, some very senior person within the Tibetan tradition. Let's put it this way, some senior person. And I saw that person had never been brought up in a way that he experienced suffering or contradiction to his whims and fancies. And he would be what one would call a spoiled child, but now a full-grown adult with tremendous powers. And he was exercising those powers like a spoiled child. Meaning, there was nobody who would dare to tell him, what you're saying is wrong, your behavior is not respectful, your behavior is whatever harmful in whatever way, you are not treating people with the respect that is deserving of another human being. The person had no consciousness of what he was doing, and he was doing things which the others, although as if they were practically verbally and emotionally beaten down by his scathing comments, for him it was fun. He was just having fun criticizing people, and those people would grovel, and it was sad to see. The poor man had never experienced somebody telling him, this is not right. We have also the further perversion which comes, which we also see in many of the Tibetan teachers, not all, some of them are extraordinarily wonderful. We have also seen, and Mark Auburn mentions in his book Sogyal Rinpoche as one in France, one of those perverts, who was also partially possessed by one of these entities that he was tuning into for purpose of power. Because they have all these rituals also in the tradition, which is largely a blend of a prior tradition blending into Tibetan Buddhism. And as a result, he had become very perverse. He was exercising that perversion on his disciples. All of them had to look up to him as, oh, he's a great master teacher. What he was doing was a perversion, and of all kinds. In this particular case, he seems to be conscious of it. But I read an interview with an Australian Tibetan Buddhist teacher in Australia, and he did things which again would be considered perverse. And later when he was, they had court cases against him for abuse, he said, but I did not realize, I'm so sorry, I did not realize that it was hurting people in this way. And all of this within the tradition was covered up as crazy wisdom. It's a phrase they have created. Oh, it's wisdom, it looks crazy to you because you are inferior. From their perspective, it's wisdom and they're doing exactly what is right for your development. No, it's not. The person was abusing his position, and there was nothing in his training to help him overcome this. So I'm using Suraj's question to look at the bigger issues that come with this. Tibetan Buddhist master reincarnating himself in the same tradition since the beginning of the tradition, assuming it is true, which it may not be, you still have this problem. And this is a very serious problem of interference. I'm saying assuming because there are cases where even though they thought it was a reincarnation of such and such, they were not sure. And then they just did what they could because they couldn't find anybody else. But it's quite possible that that person said, enough of this and I want to incarnate in a different space, isn't it? And then you don't find it within the tradition. It's not as if all of them would want to come back to this. The soul says, no, I have enough of this. I want to move on to a different kind of life experience, and it would probably break away. And they may still find, because the finding is done on the basis of omens. Omens can all be hacked, is the term we will use in modern context. Let's say you have a dream. The dream says, oh, the child will be wearing this, speaking this word, etc. And I, as a being from outside, let's say on a subtle level, and it could be a very low grade being, reads your mind. Hey, you had this dream. Now I'll make this child speak like this. And you'll say, oh, there's that reincarnation. Or worse still, a being says, I'm going to fool your entire mechanism and infuse into you this dream or with these ideas. You wake up and say, oh, I had this great dream. And then you find exactly the person that had been targeted by this entity from up there and influenced. How would you know the difference? In most cases, you wouldn't, unless you had already developed that high grade of perception that you could make out a distinction between a dream and an actual intuitive insight that came, in which case you would not be doing it through dreams, you would be doing it by an opening to higher consciousness. You understand my point is, wherever you use external omens and symbols, even people, when they say, oh, you open Savitri and you read a line and you say that gives you guidance, all of these things can be hacked. They are not fundamentally reliable methods. The only reliable method is a direct perception that comes from the psychic presence within you or from a higher intuition, and you must have already developed some touch of these two influences to be able to know. And if you don't, then you can be fooled, hacked, or misled. So this is my observation generally, taking Suraj's question. Again, I'm sorry if it is offensive to some, but I think it needs to be said. With all due respect to whatever traditions exist, not all traditions and not all practices within all traditions are healthy from a spiritual point of view. So we go to the next question.
From Revati, we have quite a long question. I'm presently attempting to understand the first canto of Savitri. I realize that this is perhaps the first authentic book that I have ever read that packs both the science and history of our Mother Earth. As she undergoes repeated cycles of construction and destruction, Parlaya, in order to form a better version of the previous model that existed, I am but tempted to understand how we as soul begin our journey here. Did we start from the inconscient, or our origin must have been from the divine, undoubtedly? When we originated from the divine, why did we separate from him and seek to realize and reunite with the divine? When I'm asked myself as to why we are here on earth, I once came across the Mother's passage. We are here to be worked upon by the divine will so that we may be its instruments. This was very soothing as compared to many religious theories that state that we are here due to some karma, that too a bad one. Hence, sir, I wish to understand as to why we and how we incarnated alongside understanding reincarnation.
This, in fact, the question of karma also comes up in the text that we are going to study from Sri Aurobindo. He takes up that question and changes our understanding of karma. So he says, if the whole of life's intention were to teach the embodied spirit to be good and moral, supposing that's the intention of karma, he says, then there is evidently a great stupidity and injustice in denying to the mind in its new incarnation all memory of its past births and actions. So if karma was there to teach you and punish you and reward you, why would you have to erase the memory of the thing for which you're being punished or being rewarded? It's great stupidity. And injustice in denying the memory. Now, with this, he is telling you basically that that is all wrong. That's not how it is. That's not even the role of karma. So we're going to study that passage shortly. But I'm coming to the observation of Revati that it's a great relief, very soothing compared to many of the religious theories which tell you such things. But the question she has really asked is this: how did we enter this as souls? How did we incarnate? Did we start from below, from the inconscient? But we are divine. We are being told that repeatedly. We are children of immortality, says the Veda. We are being told that we are this divine being, divine presence who is evolving. So it doesn't make sense that we are originating from inconscience. And then why did you separate from the divine in this whole experience? Yes, she found soothing mother's observation that it's there because you're growing to become instruments of the divine will. But that's not the core of the answer. That's the aspect of the phenomenal aspect of it. Why did you come in the first place? And this is, I'm going to take a bit of a digression on this question because it's so important before we proceed with the text that we are studying from the Life Divine. So we're going to take a digression to a passage from Savitri, which some of you may have read, studied, or heard me quote earlier in response to similar questions. And it is very elucidating of this question. This is beginning from page 454 in Savitri, the Book of Fate and the Way of Fate and the Problem of Pain, where this question has been placed to Narad. Why is there all this struggle and suffering? Why are we being punished? We didn't do anything for receiving this punishment or struggle. And Narad's answer is quite surprising, and it completely discards these conventional ideas that you are suffering because you made some mistake, you're bound in karma, etc. And he asserts the freedom of the soul. O mortal, Narad says, who complainest of death and fate, accuse none of the harms thyself hast called. You have called for this harm of death and fate. Don't say someone else is imposing it on you. You have asked for it. Okay, so we are a bit taken aback. He explains now. This troubled world thou hast chosen for thy home. Thou art thyself the author of thy pain. You chose to enter this world as your home. So again we come to this very important idea which we were highlighting last time. You have come by free will, by choice into this domain, and you might call it a home of suffering and pain, sure, if you like, but you didn't come for the suffering and pain. You came for something else. And suffering and pain might be incidental to that something else. This is the point. But you chose freely. Okay? This troubled world thou hast chosen for thy home. And we agree the world is troubled. It's not as it is. It's not a divine perfection. But maybe we can say, it's growing towards a divine perfection. And perhaps we can participate in that. Thou art thyself the author of thy pain because you chose this. So you are the author of the pain. Now comes, how did you choose? Why did you choose? Who are you truly to have made this choice? Once, in the immortal boundlessness of self, in a vast of truth and consciousness and light, the soul looked out from its felicity. It felt the spirit's interminable bliss. It knew itself deathless, timeless, spaceless, one. It saw the eternal, lived in the infinite. So all this describes you once when you were in that state of your divinity. In a vast of truth and consciousness and light. We are describing the status of the Satchidananda consciousness, which is the origin of all, which is the foundation of all, and all is ultimately formed of Satchidananda. There is nothing other than that as the divine consciousness. And you as soul from there looked out from its felicity, and you are living in this felicity. Interminable bliss. The bliss never ends. You know yourself deathless, timeless, spaceless, one, eternal. You know eternity, you know infinity of the divine consciousness. That's our home, to which we can return or live from, even live in, even while still incarnate. That's who you are truly, even now. Even now. You've lost nothing of that. This is who you are. So it's all this. It lived in this. Then something happens. Then, curious of a shadow thrown by truth, it strained towards some otherness of self. Now we go through one of these things which is so difficult to describe in human terms, in human language, even in logical terms. But Sri Aurobindo does a masterful job. What happens in that interminable bliss of the eternal and the infinite, and you know yourself deathless, spaceless one? Curious of a shadow thrown by truth. Now, this is the only way to describe. When there is all is truth, there is also a shadow of the truth. But it's not a real shadow, it is always truth. But it is an aspect of the truth which could be called a shadow of the truth. And that is a sense of otherness of self. What's it like to not be this which I am? If I'm utterly free, if I'm always one, eternal, infinite, what is it like to experience to not be eternal and infinite and one? To experience time, space, limitation, and fragmentation. Oh wow, that could be an interesting experience. But because you're utterly free, you can also have that experience in your freedom without ever losing this freedom. So that's the shadow thrown by truth. It's trained towards some otherness of self. What it's like to be not this which I am. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through night. It sensed a negative infinity. Now, in this pure consciousness of all light, you have the experience, and a negative infinity. You sense it's not there, it's not present, you're never overwhelmed. There's no dark and light fighting each other. It's all light. But experience, yes. And as you dwell on it, as you brood on it, as you begin to concentrate on it, that becomes more and more manifest, formed, real, overwhelmingly, however limited, overwhelmingly full. So, it sensed a negative infinity. A void supernal whose immense excess imitating God and everlasting time offered a ground for nature's adverse birth and matter's rigid, hard consciousness, harboring the brilliance of a transient soul that lights up birth and death and ignorant life. Looking into this as if through a lens, as if through a mirror, whoa, what a world it could be where there would be matter's hard, rigid unconsciousness, and within that would be this brilliance of a transient soul which is born and dies, which momentarily brightens and then fades out, and it lights up birth and death and ignorant life in this darkness. Whoa, what an experience, what an adventure. So it looks at this possibility, and the more it concentrates, the more it dwells on it, as if taking at the backdrop its greater felicity, all that recedes, and more of this becomes the interest. A mind arose that stared at nothingness, till figures formed of what could never be. So by dwelling on this, it's as if everything which can never be in the consciousness you are in now begins to acquire its own independent form. It housed the contrary of all that is. The only thing that is this felicity, timeless, spaceless, one, eternal bliss. But now suddenly you're able to experience this, the contrary of all that is. A naught appeared as being's huge sealed cause, its dumb support in a blank infinite, in whose abysm spirit must disappear. Wow, in that depth of darkness, if I plunge, I will actually disappear and cease to be, cease to exist, as if. Of course, you will never. A darkened nature lived and held the seed of spirit hidden and feigning not to be. So you have a darkened nature, the seed of spirit there, pretending as if it doesn't exist. Actually, it always exists because you're always that. But now entering this adventure where it seems like you're lost and you don't exist, and you wake up from slumber. Eternal consciousness, that which is your normal thing, became a freak of an unsouled almighty inconscience. This becomes the very opposite, unsouled almighty inconscience. And breathed no more as spirit's native air. Bliss was an incident of a mortal hour, a strangent in the insentient universe. This universe which you're dwelling on feels nothing, and bliss perhaps is a stranger there, even you don't know what that thing is. As one drawn by the grandeur of the void, the soul attracted leaned to the abyss. Wow, what an extraordinary grand experience this will be, and you lean as if into it. It longed for the adventure of ignorance. Now comes the whole description of our world and the suffering, death, and all the issues from the soul's experience. What is it like? If you're totally, remember, you're always immortal. You're always blissful. You can never lose that bliss. You're always eternal. You're always, infinity and eternity. You're always one. You can never be broken. Nothing at all. Absolutely. And then you're going to enter this as if a video game where you'll forget all this. But you know that you'll always be. So it longed for the adventure of ignorance and the marvel and the surprise of the unknown. It's only entering in this you will have, oh, I would never imagine this. Oh, I could be surprised by something which is so unimaginable. And the endless possibility that lurked in the womb of chaos and in nothing's gulf, or looked from the unfathomed eyes of chance. So here in this darkness, you have infinite possibilities, infinite potential, because it's finally the freedom of the divine hiding in darkness. Anything could happen, everything could happen, and the most unimaginable thing could pop out and be achieved. Or you could realize it, or draw it out, or create it, or be surprised by it. It tired of its unchanging happiness, so to say. It turned away from immortality. It was drawn to hazard's call and danger's charm. It yearned to the pathos of grief, the drama of pain. Now imagine, and we understand this more easily when we play a role in a cinema or theatre. You play the role to experience pathos, to experience grief. You know it's not real. You watch a movie where this person has died, somebody you have loved through the movie, and it's a tragic movie, this fellow has to die, and you cry because he has died. At the back of the mind, you know it's just an actor playing a role. The actor is still alive, he's playing a wonderful role. You love him because of the role he played. Why are you crying? What a stupid thing you could say. And it's on this level. Because you know you are absolutely free. You'll never be killed. And yet the experience of as if being killed, as if losing everything. So, it turned away from immortality. It yearned to the pathos of grief and the drama of pain, perdition's peril, as if you can be completely extinguished. The wounded bare escape. You're so wounded, you're about to lose everything, and you just barely scrape through and manage to survive. The music of ruin and its glamour and crash. To have everything lost, to have everything destroyed, there's a music to it. And it's not a perverse thing. From the soul's perspective, so it's, whoa, what an experience. Think of it as a simulation, as a video game that you're playing where you lose the battle and everything is destroyed. Whoa, what an experience. I could never have had that in that bliss, so to say again. The savor of pity and the gamble of love. The passion, and the gamble of love and passion, and the ambiguous face of fate. Fate is standing before you. You know something is going to happen, but you don't know what it is. It seems to be helping you. On the other hand, it seems to be blocking you. It seems to be harming you. On the other hand, it seems to be helping you. It's ambiguous. A world of hard endeavor and difficult toil and battle on extinction's perilous verge. It's as if everything could be lost. And we all experience this in some form or other. And yet somewhere at the back of the mind, you know, eventually everything will be taken care of. Maybe after 10 years, maybe after 100 years, maybe after 10 centuries, maybe after 10 millennia, maybe after the entire destruction and reform of the earth. But eventually it has to happen because that's the nature of things. All is divine essentially. But what happens now? This is the challenge. Battle on extinction's perilous verge. A clash of forces. A vast incertitude. The joy of creation out of nothingness. You come into a desert and you build an entire empire. What an achievement, isn't it? Strange meetings on the roads of ignorance. Suddenly you pass, oh, that seems like a familiar face. Momentarily there's a touch, it passes. I don't know why, I don't know from where. It's over, it's gone. Who was that? What happened? And the companionship of half-known souls. Or the solitary greatness and lonely force of a separate being conquering its world. To be all alone when everything is against you and you survive and overcome or cling to some higher value despite everything else. Wow. Solitary greatness and lonely force. All of this which is described. And you could dwell on each of these words. There are such beautiful images. Look up examples of this. Each of these would be a theme of a kind of a cinematic topic or theme. And of grandeur in cinema, of each of these could become one. All of this called it from its too safe eternity. So you see this because the soul is the creator of its own freedom, of its own reality. A huge descent began a giant fall. For what the spirit sees creates a truth, and what the soul imagines is made a world. There's such profound truths in this. We read rapidly and we say, I've understood. No, you've nothing. You got a glimpse of what he's telling you. He's telling you so much more. I'll just elaborate on a couple of these points to give you an idea of how it works. A huge descent began a giant fall. This whole movement is one of a plunging in gradations of consciousness into what is for us darkness. For what the spirit sees creates a truth. In other words, everything that exists is the perception of spirit, but as an aspect, as a facet, as an experience in the totality of Brahman. There is nothing which is not, because Brahman sees itself as that, therefore that's what makes it happen. But something even more profound, what the soul imagines is made a world. And this is the reality we experience in our dream state to some extent. Whatever you imagine becomes the reality in rich detail, down to the tiniest molecule and atom. Everything is just like that in a single flash created. Or in the domain of the worlds, when you go out of the body in conscious experience, or in dream state, or in lucid dream, or after death. Your state of consciousness, the way you look, you form an entire world out of your consciousness perspective. Down to the tiniest detail, every fine detail of every stone is as if a representation of something of your consciousness, or your state, or your visual aspiration, imagination, creation. Every little detail is yourself projected, objectivized as a world in itself. And again, in this book, we find Mark describing such a thing in one of the lifetimes where he died as a child, all alone. And in the passage after he remembers, he describes how in that solitude and death, in that lonely state of an abandoned child, when he goes out, he says, if the world rejects me, I will choose to reject the world itself. And he as if withdraws into this world of his own creation. Wallows in that self-pity or that barrenness of it, and lives in it for how long? From the soul's experience, subjectively, it could be centuries. We don't know what it is in human time because they're completely different. Until he describes a light being comes. Infuses the memory of the divine love. And then withdraws. And slowly that memory works. It seeps in, frees the soul from this. It reminds you of who you are, draws you back. Eventually he breaks out of it. This is such a powerful narrative. It is so important. The glimpse it gives you of the nature of the after-death passage is so valuable. It's one of the reasons why I am promoting Mark's book as well as his experiences in such a way, because it is so valuable. This is true for all of us. And that's why it is so important to be conscious and integrated in all these parts of your being and not lose the memory of who you are. And it is that memory which pulls you back and frees you from that world. You will remember I mentioned recently perhaps that when the mother went to help Kennedy, US president, because he was an instrument for her, when he died, when he was killed by his own secret service, she went to help him on the other side. He was lost in a world of his creation, formed of the Christian theology belief system. And he was so totally lost in it that she said she couldn't help him. Obviously, she did. At the end of the day, she still did what she had to by infusion of something. He would have experienced in this world, suddenly some presence comes. I don't know what, being of light. He would have interpreted it in terms of his beliefs. But eventually, the truth it touches him with will work through and eventually dissolve, free him, or fragments of his belief created world would begin to appear disparate or incoherent, and some deeper memory would wake up, and eventually he would outgrow that. But what a loss, what a missed opportunity, how much time wasted even in such passages or in such worlds. But this is to tell you, it's just in this one line where he says, what the soul imagines is made a world. The truth of this is a profound truth. When you shed your body and you are in this, whatever you choose and imagine is your world. Which you? Is it the deeper remembrance of the soul's spiritual truth, or is it just one of these belief systems that you have formulated, created, or that we were trapped in your human life or in some intermediate transition? And you are in a world which is exactly that which you expected. And if it was a world of fear and suffering and hells, well, that's what you experience because you create it. And so the extent of the truth of this, you understand only when you experience that either out of the body, in dream state, in lucid dream state, or after death. What the soul imagines is made a world. In this case, though, we are describing something much more comprehensive. The whole cosmic physical reality is part of that soul's experience of the self. A thought that leaped from the timeless can become indicator of cosmic consequence and the itinerary of the gods. So from that creative impulse, when the world is as if born like this, wow, what an experience, the gods now as if move to execute, to make this happen. A cyclic movement in eternal time. Thus came, born from a blind, tremendous choice, this great, perplexed and discontented world. He's telling you how the world came to be and why you entered it. From a tremendous choice. This haunt of ignorance, this home of pain. There are pitched desire's tents, grief's headquarters. Desire is a tent, it's a temporary transition. Grief's headquarters are a vast disguise conceals the eternal's bliss. And you see, this is Narad's explanation for how you chose this world. So he says, do not complain of death and fate. Accuse none of the harms thou thyself hast caused. You chose this, you created this, you came into this, calling it your home. You are the author of your pain. So obviously, Ashwapati then asks, well, what happens then? Is there no remedy within? What is fate if not spirit's will, fulfilled by cosmic forces? But then can that be changed? So that becomes the bigger part of the discussion that follows. But all this, here you get a glimpse of what is the soul's experience when it enters this world. You are attracted by this hazard's call, danger's charm, yearning for pathos of grief and drama of pain, perdition's peril, wounded bare escape, a music of ruin and glamour and crash, savor of pity, gamble of love and passion. Battle on extinction's perilous verge, clash of forces, a vast incertitude, the joy of creation out of nothingness. All this is the nature of this world, especially the physical domain of it. The most dark, the most difficult, the most rigid. And all this is pushed to the limit here. That is why you chose freely to enter this experience and to grow through this. There's a bigger purpose, of course. We are through this whole process now bringing that which is our home, that Satchidananda here upon earth, and establishing it here. Making this world a vehicle for that bliss now to be overtly expressed, awakened, transformed, etc. That's the bigger journey. But the nature of this challenge and exploration is precisely to build that. To build what you know, what you are, to become more and more what you are truly here in this domain where everything is the very opposite, isn't it? So I think with this is a kind of a detailed response, but with this I hope Revati's question is answered. We are divine in our origin, undoubtedly, that she says. So why at all did we come here? Not because you got trapped, not because there was some karmic cycle which binds you like a machine. It's because you chose. Understand there's a big difference between the Buddhist approach, which then you see reflected in the Jain tradition again, where there's a gigantic machinery and there's no real fundamental divinity or soul. You're just like this hollow shell with no center. But even there, if you go deep enough into the tradition and the experience in the tradition, they'll say the center is the focal point, the emptiness, which is the fullness, and all the contradiction of terms which come when the mind approaches the self. At the end of it, the truth is you chose, because this world offers a certain realm of experience for a fulfillment that you don't need to have got. You chose it. And there are large numbers of beings who will never have it. They'll say, it doesn't interest us. And perhaps the larger part of creation will not be interested. Those who chose it are the ones who are the more adventurous and the more... But we fulfill a divine purpose in this. And so I think then we understand the mother's message. We are here to be worked upon by the divine will so that we may be its instruments. But in the process, as a first step, we as if forgot our own divinity and we've forgotten the divine will. And now we reawaken to it and now become conscious instruments for what? For the divine light to manifest, incarnate, to develop and build and transform this darkness into a fully revealed Satchidananda in the domain of matter now. So such could be the long-term journey. And we don't need to go further in that. You understand here, nowhere in this description is any kind of binding or compulsion. Of course, being in a sticky material, you will experience its stickiness. But you as soul are fundamentally free even from that stickiness. You choose to play with the rules of the game and with its stickiness. You choose even to accept the stickiness. And when you decide, you can say enough of this and you can just cut off, wash off, throw away the stickiness. Or ask for a help which will wash it off and break free from it. So we come to the next question, which is about karma.
From the nickname Sraddhalu, what is the role of karma in growth and experience? Are there no past karmic effects? How is it that astrology sometimes catches events that are going to happen, such as accidents? And from someone under Re-PXX nickname, how do we remove our karma and suffering? This belief, removal of karma, astrology, and suffering, how do we let it go? If we committed a mistake consciously and unconsciously, will this person who fraudulently enjoy life, will there be no justice? Gods are punishing good people is my general experience.
So both of these are about karma and punishment, something we touched upon last time. But again, if you look from this perspective of what we have just read in Savitri, none of this is true in the way people understand it. Yes, certainly, there is what we call karma, which is purely a process within nature, which is a consequence of the way nature works. Put it this way, as an analogy. If you've ever been in a swimming pool, where the water all around you is one big mass, you push the water, create a wave. You notice at the moment where you're creating the wave, you are also pushed back. Fine, that's action and reaction, very superficially. But now watch the wave. The wave ripples out, ripples out, ripples out. Eventually it bounces somewhere and then comes back to you in some way, passes through you, bounces all over until it fades out. In other words, everything you create eventually touches you in some way or other because everything is interconnected. Everything is one gigantic working of energy, indivisible, remember. Your division, your sense of division and separateness is the illusion. So the idea that you can commit some action and be impervious to its consequence is silly. Because we are all part of one whole. We are indivisible. Remember, you're one. So that divine truth represented here now in processes and in forms. Anything you do eventually ripples out, eventually touches you in some way or other. Put it very generally. Now, if you put something out with specific intent which is formed of your consciousness and your energy, well, that attaches to you and resonates with you much more. So to the extent you've put it out with your energy, it tends to come back to you because it is attracted to your own energy. And this is where we see the sense of karmic consequence of actions that you put out. Because, well, you are carrying it. It's made of your substance. Obviously, it'll affect you more than even others. So once you understand this, you say, yes, of course, it's obvious. But then to say that you're bound and you're stuck, that's the error. That happens because in the Buddhist tradition, you've thrown out soul and God. And as a consequence, you have lost all sources of freedom. So it looks like one gigantic machine. But if you recognize soul is what freely creates this ripple, it can also freely put a counter ripple. It can freely calm the ripples. It can freely redirect the ripples for the same ripple created now to come out with a different result and even a positive result. And if you can't as soul, then certainly the divine as Brahman can from its freedom. And if you can't with your skill, you can ask for that help which can. So at the end of the day, yes, karma exists. No big deal. It's just the process of action and reaction and consequences of whatever you put out. But the divine can take that same karma and turn it into a positive outcome if it's negative. Use it to help you grow. Or you could, by shifting your grade of consciousness, make yourself impervious to a grade of energy which is now of a lower grade. And that no more comes back to stick to you because, well, you're no more resonating on that level. So the level at which you create karma, it will affect you as long as you live on that level. If you outgrow it, it ceases, it dissipates. I had asked this question to my teacher once, MP Pandit. I asked him, because I was still mixed with all these ideas which came from the more conventional, spiritual traditions. A lot of Hinduism today is heavily mixed with some of these ideas which come from Buddhism and Jainism. So I asked him this question. I said, all the little karmas that we do they all come back to you as so many little things, or do they come back in one big thing which knocks you? He said something interesting. He said, most of the little things just fizzle out on their own. They don't even need to come back to you. They're ripples. You put out, let's say, 20 small ripples. Doesn't mean you'll come back with 20 small ripples hitting you. Most of them just fade out because it's unsustained energy. It fizzles out, it dissipates. And when he said that, I suddenly started laughing. I said, wow. Because this was the theme of the freedom, once again. It's not like a mathematical thing. In some of these traditions, even create a mathematics of karma. You put this much plus that much plus that much, you will get back so much. Or they will, some of these are so silly. They'll tell you things like, if you accept to take somebody else's karma, then when you take it, it becomes 1/10 of their suffering. So if you take their suffering, then you suffer 1/10 and they are freed from it. Now, first, where does this 1/10 idea come? Okay, is it even true? So let's take it to its logical conclusion. Then if now that person takes it back from me, he makes it 1/10 of what I have got, right? Then I take it back from him and it becomes 1/10 of that. So just by passing it between us, we have reduced it to 1,000th. Now at this point, you have to stop and say, okay, either this is true, then let's play that mathematical game, or you say there's something wrong with this whole line of thinking, isn't it? In fact, it's not like this. It's not like karma has to be exhausted by a mathematical process. It fizzles out of its own when you outgrow in terms of consciousness. Yes, certainly such things can be done that you take on the burden of somebody else's negative energy. That often happens when you share lives with people, sometimes in marriage or in other forms of relationship. There's a shared karma. Even it can happen in business, that you take on a certain business partner, but you're closely bound in the machinery of the action that you're going to do. There's a sharing of things they may bring, including the problems they have. But it's not a mathematical thing. And quite a bit of this can just fizzle out simply by the fact of you saying, okay, I'm going to outgrow this, and shift your consciousness. And just ceases to have any value. So, when RPX is asking this question, how to remove our karma and suffering and get rid of the belief, I would rather say first, get rid of the beliefs and these wrong beliefs. Consciously reorient your mind to this greater truth of freedom. Because by entering into that belief system, you're binding yourself in a wrong understanding. And then remember what the soul imagines creates a world. Well, you create your own problems, which need not be at all. Rather, highlight the freedom of the soul. Recognize, yes, the ripple effects exist everywhere. good, bad, negative. Some of them are just irrelevant, inconsequential, fizzling out. Do not obsess with it. Focus rather on doing what is right at this moment for the growth, your own, collective, and larger, whatever your context at that moment. Work consciously for growth and for evolution in all circumstances. So I would put it in more simplistic terms by saying, do what is the right thing to be done at that time. And I'm not saying from a moral perspective. The reference would be what helps the maximum growth for the maximum number of people in the best way possible. Whatever that means to you at that moment within your limited understanding. So this whole business where he says if we commit a mistake consciously or unconsciously, why do we get punished by God or gods? And there's so many people who enjoy life although they live a fraudulent life. All these problems are resolved. Somebody, despite fraudulence, is able to have, let's say, wealth or comfort. Why? Not because of fraudulence, because of skill. He exercised a skill to get a certain outcome. Doesn't mean there won't be consequences. He will get consequences. If at some point the government wakes up and says, okay, now we're going to act on those who have committed this crime, well, suddenly it hits him really super hard. What you see happening in the United States now is fascinating. Massive crimes of financial diversions, misuse, etc. And politicians have been doing this on a scale going back 50 years more. And suddenly now this government is saying, hey, we're going to investigate all this and take you to task. And those people are dead scared. When all these years they thought they ruled it, they could get away with it. It will come back in some form eventually, or not. If in this life you had your fun, you were corrupt, the machinery was equally corrupt, you got out of it, fine. So you would have had exercised a skill which got you greater whatever wealth or comfort. You went on. If you did not deliberately, intentionally do harm to others, none of it would bother you. You would say, hey, okay, I had an easy life and move on. Maybe I even did good to people in the process. But if you did it causing harm and there's an element of guilt and hurt, that guilt is gnawing away at you. And especially when you leave the body, that guilt becomes now the overwhelming experience and you live in the world created by that guilt. And you suffer as a consequence of your own creation, of the state you're in. So remember, it's not like karma is coming, now I'll punish you because you punished so many or you caused harm to so many. No, it's the state you have caused in yourself which is now coming as your reality, which causes you distress or delays your growth or evolution, pushes you into darkness where you're lost. You don't even know where is the light, where is the happiness. But I'm going to say, this is what you were living in earlier before you quit your body. That has now become objectivized and exaggerated because you don't have the rigidity of the body anymore. I've seen so many people in positions of great authority and power. Some of these are very crude human beings, very coarse. They have the power of the vital energy, which is how they rule or build a large business. But the person is so crude and coarse, deeply unhappy, deeply dark even internally. What will happen when they leave the body? They just continue in the mess that they are in. It's not a punishment. So it would be a mistake to say, oh, the person is enjoying himself. No, the person is in a mess internally. Yes, maybe you're seeing him having certain kinds of luxuries or benefits, but they are the result of a skill, of a power of vitality exercised to grab the wealth or the power or the position and take charge where you were too weak to be able to grab and take. That's all. So it's not a consequence of moral good or bad or punishment. It's just consequence of your state of consciousness, your skills, your exercise of power. The problem with this whole business of karma, reward, punishment business is it has caused people to become passive. Passive to such an extent that those who do not believe in this are the ones who have developed this power to seize, to grab opportunities. And you say, oh yes, I have done so much good. It will come to me in one way or other, so I will wait. You didn't make the effort to grab. And that's the reason why you didn't get it. So you need to really dissolve all these wrong ideas. So I'm going to focus on how do you let it go by recognizing what is true, by cutting through this false understanding. And then what do you do next? Well, if it is you're looking for that particular thing, if that's important for you, go for it and get it. Maybe you will not follow those fraudulent means, you'll follow other means. But the point is that really what you want? Or is that a representation of something else that you're looking for through it? So go for what you want, do what you need to, and you will get what you want if that's really what you're looking for. And I don't mean in superficial terms, in terms of your soul evolution, what you're looking for, pursue that. And then you will have, as a consequence, other ripple effects which will accompany, because that's inevitable for the purpose that you're exercising. Nevertheless, recognize if somebody else is more competent and capable and you're in a rat race where there's a limited content, the more competent person will grab more than you. So is that really your priority? Why are you grabbing that? For what? You need to do some deep introspection and then start living your life. If it requires competition, yes, go ahead, do the competition. If it requires war, yes, that's your nature, that's your svabhava, you are a kshatriya. Well, fight, but then choose what it is you're fighting for and the means by which you will fight. Because that may vary from person to person. And then you will have the fulfillment. Whether you lose or not, you'll have the satisfaction. I lived my life, even though I died by betrayal. This is such a great triumph of what I was seeking to realize, to cling to those higher values and honor, whatever it is. You'll have the fullness. You'll have been successful in your life. So look for what it is that your soul is aspiring for. Throughout all these ideas of karma and suffering. Suffering is a consequence of your limitation and your littleness. Read Sri Aurobindo's explanation for this. You will find very simple summary form in the Isha Upanishad. He says, when your consciousness is small and disconnected from the whole, your knowledge is small, your power is small, your effectivity is small, your ability to enjoy is small, therefore you suffer. Recover your oneness with the all, however, to whatever extent, and automatically with it your knowledge grows, your power grows, your ability to enjoy grows, and you have all the consequences. So what do you want to do? Do you want to remain small, or do you want to widen your consciousness and grow in its capacities? Well, then take steps in the direction that works for you. So, and then your suffering will diminish in proportion as you grow in consciousness. You'll have struggle. Struggle does not mean suffering. You may struggle and you'll have the joy of struggle. When you run, you do exercise. It's struggle. You're putting your body through pain. But you feel good as a result, isn't it? You feel the benefit of it. So it's not that struggle is bad. Suffering is a consequence of smallness of consciousness. Struggle is a part of the nature of this reality, this world, particularly the physical domain. And that's fine. And again, in the question, the mistake, consciously or unconsciously, does not matter. What matters is, did you grow from the learning that the mistake gave you? If you have grown, you have moved on. Even if by mistake you hurt somebody, by mistake you deliberately hurt somebody and you feel bad about it, don't think of karma consequence. Do what is right, which is what? Tell the person, I'm so very sorry, I did it at that moment. I don't mean to, I really don't want you to face this consequence or suffer like this. I'm sorry. Do what you can to undo the damage caused and then move on in consciousness that you will not repeat that same mistake. And if you have moved on, the consequences of that will not affect you. You will have grown as a result of the mistake. So do not worry about mistakes. Inevitably we will, because that's the nature of life. We are in ignorance. We learn through mistakes. Do not worry about making mistakes. Do not fear making mistakes. Rather, learn from the mistakes that you make so that you never repeat them. So the way I say this, and I had this interaction in context of some administrative process, I said such and such a thing, that was an error of whatever. So the person said, no, it was not a mistake. We were struggling, we were in difficulty. I said, no, I don't mean it as a mistake. It was an error of sequencing, let's say, scheduling, from which we have now learnt. We had to go through that to be able to learn this. Tomorrow, if we repeat this, that would be a mistake. Mistake is when knowingly you will misapply. That would be a mistake. But otherwise, making errors is part of our process of learning. So do not fear making errors or even making mistakes. Outgrow, learn, continue to grow, and that's all that will matter. So we will go to the last question, which is from SU. It completes this part of the discussion.
SU, he's writing, what happens to lower movements in different parts of our being? Do they carry over until overcome and conquered?
So I think by lower movements is precisely these tendencies where you get upset, you get angry, you have whatever tendencies of character. Do they carry over until they are overcome and conquered? That would be pointless. the point Sri Aurobindo makes, and I think we will have to take up the text itself next time. So, if the purpose was to repeat the same character, the same temperament again and again, it would not be very helpful. Precisely because we want to build a full, rich, diverse range of experience, we need to approach the same issue from different positions. If in this lifetime my fault of character, let's say, is a certain meekness, does that mean I'm condemned to remain meek across lives until eventually I outgrow it? No. I would say, well, this meekness was also a consequence of a temperament I had chosen where knowledge was more important than power. Now, in order to build the courage, I'm going to incarnate in a body or a temperament, environment, family, lineage where heroism is stronger than knowledge. And here I'm going to build this heroic courage, power, force, ability to wield energy, etc. And then I'll say, well, after all this, I still want to know what it means to dedicate my life just to service in love. So I'll take a different life. And after that, the soul might say, well, you know what? These are three disparate tendencies in me. I have not learned to harmonize them. How can my knowledge act with force and compassion at the same time? Well, I'm going to have a life now of integrating these things and forming this as a single movement, effortless and spontaneous. So I'll take on a different temperament, maybe take birth in an environment which is better suited for this. Now, there are complexities here, which Sri Aurobindo and the mother have explained in great detail. To the extent that the soul is sufficiently evolved, it can choose its environment. To the extent that it is not sufficiently evolved to be able to make that choice, still it has this aspiration in this direction. There are beings of the psychic world who will help it to find the right place, right environment where it could get the kind of support and nourishment required for the line of experience it wants. In any case, from that domain of the psychic, either by your individual or by the help, you are assisted in finding the best circumstance for that evolution. In extremely undeveloped cases where the soul has even acquired a certain coarseness or crudeness of its, let's say, in its prior tendencies, it would simply fall in that which resonates best with its current evolutionary state and temperament and vibration. And this is what I want to describe is what we saw in that example I mentioned earlier in Ghana, where those criminals in jail, all of them obviously, at least those who participated in that very barbaric act, represent a grade of vibration of consciousness which the soul itself might not be sufficiently evolved to be able to avoid. And then it is as if drawn to something which corresponds to its current grade of evolution. Again, there, if there is an environment which is refined, it will get the nourishment it needs to outgrow that current grade of evolution. If the environment is coarse, it may even find itself bound in coarse tendencies and even criminal tendencies. And the surface personality may be taken completely off track, and the soul internally may suffocate at this. And this is what happens in many such cases of criminals, drug addicts, and so on. Drugs are again one of those very important things. Mark very strongly speaks against this in his books also. The reason he gives, of course, which comes from his experience of seeing what happens to people who have opened themselves through drugs to the lower vital worlds, and what it does to them when they leave their body, the damage it creates internally while in the body as well as when they leave the body, etc. But eventually, you see, the soul goes through that distress, it suffers. And to the extent that it is living in that domain, from there when it takes birth, it will tend to take birth in an environment resonating with those vibrations. The soul inside is pure, but it is bound in this tendency. So at this point, you'll say, that is karma. No, it's not a reward and punishment. It's the continuation of a momentum of a crude, coarse tendency of energies that you've wallowed and identified yourself with, which now pull you into domains of that type. You understand how this works? So you must consciously erase this idea of reward, punishment, and that the whole machinery is designed to somehow force you into good, bad behavior by karma as a whip. No, it's not that. Remember what we ended with last time? It is not as a machinery for the persistent renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality that rebirth exists. What is rebirth for? As a means for the evolution of the spiritual being in nature. Once you recognize this, you're a spiritual being, and for your evolution, rebirth is there as a mechanism. As a consequence now, next paragraph he says, it becomes at once evident that in this plan of rebirth, the false importance our mind attaches to the memory of past lives disappears altogether. What you did then, does it matter? False importance doesn't matter. If indeed rebirth were governed by a system of rewards and punishments, if life's whole intention were to teach the embodied spirit to be good and moral, supposing that that is the intention in the dispensation of karma, and it is not what it looks like in this presentation of it, a mechanical law of recompense and retribution without any reformatory meaning or purpose, supposing all this, then there is evidently a great stupidity and injustice in denying to the mind in its new incarnation all memory of its past births and actions. So either you accept that it's all designed, karma is there to make you moral and good by punishing you, etc., then it should better give you the memory of what it is punishing you for. Or if memory is not there, then that's not the goal. The goal is totally different. What is the goal? Precisely by forgetting, you get a chance at a fresh start to be able to grow in your capacity and experience of consciousness. And if you had the memory of all that, you would not have the freedom to be able to develop your new possibilities, to outgrow your limitations that you might have had in the past. So you either believe that it is there for your growth of consciousness, or it's there as reward and punishment, but then the machine is not properly designed. This is the problem when any religious, philosophical or other traditions attach themselves to a either partial truth or even a falsehood. Eventually, it does not fit with the rest of reality, because reality has to be cohesive, coherent. It's only an explanation where you see the full cohesiveness that you realize, yes, now this makes sense. So if somewhere you see there is something is not coherent, and this is the bulk of these questions which say, well, why is God punishing me although I'm doing good? Then you've misunderstood the whole mechanism. Either there's no God punishment, or your doing good is not the point of it, or there's something more to it which you've missed. So always use this as a reference. Only when you see this cohesiveness, then you say, yes, this makes sense. Okay, so if you forget, for it deprives the reborn being of all chance to realize why he is rewarded or punished, or to get any advantage from the lesson of the profitability of virtue and the unprofitableness of sin vouchsafed to him or inflicted on him. So if the goal was to make you good and not a bad person, then you need to remember. Otherwise you can't know. Even since life seems often to teach the opposite lesson, for he sees the good suffer for their goodness and the wicked prosper by their wickedness. He is rather likely to conclude in this perverse sense, because he has not the memory of an assured and constant result of experience, which would show him that the suffering of the good man was due to his past wickedness, and the prosperity of the sinner due to the splendor of his past virtues. So because we don't see the past, we can't even say that, hey, this good man, he's suffering because of something he did in his past, right? We can't know that. So we would rather simply follow, hey, the good people suffer, so I won't be good. So that virtue is the best policy in the long run for the reasonable and prudent soul entering into the dispensation of nature. If you had memory, you would have said, yes, now I should be virtuous because it works, I can see. Even the bad fellow is today benefiting because he was good in the past, so I can understand. So much of literature, so many of the teachers and even saintly personages today, popularly known and worshipped around the world with many books and followings, will tell you this kind of nonsense. I don't want to take names because some of these are very highly respected names. And they will tell you things like, through your suffering, do you realize how much karma you have erased? Oh, it was so disappointing to hear some of these stories coming from their disciples who had actually heard from them. And then you realize they actually don't know what they're talking about. They may be living in a saintly consciousness, they may be living in something or not, or they may be pretending, or they had some experience and now they've built up a teaching around things they've read and understood. But it is a deception, it is an error. And so much of humanity is chasing after these kinds of deceptions, unfortunately. But become clear, this has nothing to do with vice, virtue, and reward and punishment. Still, Sri Aurobindo answers the question to the extreme, okay, because he is answering all your doubts. It might be said that the psychic being within remembers. So you've forgotten, but the psychic knows, I was a bad fellow then, so now I'm suffering. But such a secret memory would seem to have little effect or value on the surface. Or it may be said that it realizes what has happened and learns its lessons when it reviews and assimilates its experience after issuing from the body. There are traditions which will say that. So, okay, now you have suffered. When you leave your body, you will go into this. It's like described like a judge. God is judge, or some great angel is going to be the judge. They'll ask you, what are the good things you did? Now we're going to weigh. What are the bad things you did? We're going to weigh. Is the good more than the bad? I'm telling you, this is true. This is existing in traditions. It is as ridiculous as this. I'm sorry to say it if you have ever heard that in your tradition, but we have to say it for what it is. It is so ridiculous. And then you'll be rewarded or punishment. Or sometimes you're told, now you have just barely done. I'm going to send you back so that you can do more good, so that your weighing will become all good. Then we will send you to paradise. Oh my God. Occasionally, and I'm sorry to say this, but these are all real examples. In one of the traditions, they said, so that person died and soon after somebody else died. So they actually said that person was put in this, what do you call that, court of God, justice of his good and bad. And then they said, there's a problem. Is this actually good or bad? We need to call that other person. Who knows? So the other person was made to die and get onto that court hearing and had to testify, no, actually this was good or this was bad. That's how they explained away the other person's death. I don't know, it was a relative, some wife or somebody, it doesn't matter. This is the kind of childish stupidity that passes for religion, spirituality and teachings. I'm sorry if it's too sharp a word, but this is the reality. So, but this intermittent memory does not very apparently help in the next birth. So what if you had in the transition some memory, then you take birth again, it's gone. For most of us, persist in sin and error and show no tangible signs of having profited by the teachings of our past experience. So if by logic you say maybe the soul remembers, maybe something happens, you don't see the evidence for it. We don't find that there is a growth in better morality or ethics or goodness in moral terms, etc. But, Sri Aurobindo says, if a constant development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning, and the building of a new personality in a new birth is the method, then any persistent or complete memory of the past life or lives might be a chain and serious obstacle. Now we come to a better understanding. The goal is constant development of being by developing cosmic experience. He's not saying earthly experience. He's not saying one planet, cosmic. Your vision is across planets, across civilizations, across infinite potential and possibilities, because everything you can imagine exists somewhere. Development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning of our birth. And what is the method? Building of new personality in a new birth is the method. Then obviously any persistent or complete memory of past life or lives might be a chain and serious obstacle. So you don't want persistent memory and you don't want complete memory as far as possible. Until maybe you've reached a stage when it doesn't matter. Then you might allow or not. It's irrelevant. So it would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, preoccupations, and a tremendous burden hampering the free development of the new personality and its formulation of new experience. And comes the line which I read earlier, a clear and detailed memory of past loves, hatreds, rancors, attachments, connections would be equally a stupendous inconvenience. For it would bind the reborn being to a useless repetition or a compulsory continuation of his surface past, and stand heavily in the way of his bringing out new possibilities from the depths of the spirit. You want to draw out new things, not repeat the old. And there's so much within you, infinite potential within you, which you're meant to draw out now, one more step in this life. Why go back to the past? So the rest we will see later. I'm going to pause at this point. We will look at the text later, and some of the questions on the chat box I have not looked at. Please keep them. Do not delete. Do not retract your messages. Please keep them. But I'm going to highlight this. All your past attachments. He gives this list: past loves, hatreds, rancors, attachments, connections would be equally a stupendous inconvenience. All your past attachments, which belong to the past life, have been erased. Let that be so for this life. You should not need to change to a whole new body in order to get free from the burden of all this. When I was small, my best friend betrayed me and I still carry the rancor. I look at that person's face, I feel bad. So and so deceived me in love, so and so betrayed me in finance, whatever it is. And you cling to all that. When you leave your body, you'll have to discard all this and start fresh. And my recommendation is, let that fresh start be now. At least as much as you can, wash it all out. I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to repeat because it's so important and we must repeat many times until it becomes a part of our nature. Pranabda, mother's attendant and head of the physical department, he used to say, people tell me, forgive and forget. And I say, I will forgive, but I won't forget. Good point. But in what way not forget? I won't forget that this person is capable of doing harm. This person is not worthy of my full trust. That lesson I have learned, I will not forget that. But forget the circumstances of that harm and the damage done, because that's not relevant anymore. Keep the essence, because you need, that's part of your growth. Do not trust blindly. Trust but verify. There are many lessons you will learn. But keep the lessons and the essence of that learning, which is the soul, will keep. And in the same way as if you're going to take a whole new birth in a whole new personality, let go of your past and take a whole new birth now. You can wait for your birthday, you can wait for the new year and say, now I'm going to start my new year or new step in my life, new birth. Or you can make that today and every day. Or at least on some occasions, every now and then you say, all right, now it's time for me to shed all this junk. Move forward. It will happen in the rhythm of your growth. Suddenly you'll feel suffocated with all the junk that you've accumulated and you'll say, now I need to break free. And I mean psychological junk primarily. Now I need to break free of all this. And it comes in phases in life automatically. And it comes because the soul says, enough now. Time to move on, change. And if you cannot at that point, then the soul says, all right, I need to shed this personality which is preventing me from growing and take on a whole new personality. But if you can do this, then you can continue your life as a fresh newborn, even though your biology is kind of more aged. But as a fresh newborn, with the freedom, you can start living the new life that you want. And for those of us who wish to live this spiritual life, for whom this constant development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning, and building a new personality in a new birth is the method. If this is what you're looking for, then this is what you should do in a kind of a minor, limited way to the extent you can. And start your new life. Every day if you can, but to whatever extent, whenever you can. Think about this, dwell in this, make the effort necessary. Many of the pending questions we will take up next time. But consciously work now to dissolve all these wrong ideas. You are free. You are one in Satchidananda. If we may again read those few lines. Once in the immortal boundlessness of self, In a vast of truth and consciousness and light, the soul looked out from its felicity. It felt the Spirit's interminable bliss. It knew itself deathless, timeless, spaceless, one. It saw the eternal, lived in the infinite. This is what we still are in our essence, in our origin, in our core. You only have to lean back as if, recall and relive and replug into that. Maybe there are many, many layers, doesn't matter. But in the core of it all, in the soul, in the psychic being, this is what you still are. And at the very least, in dwelling within, in the part where you feel the love for the Divine Mother, the gratitude and the joy of knowing the Divine, in that part, from that part, you will feel its influence flow out. Hold that, cling to that. Let that become the center of your life and live from there. This would be your way forward. Because we are always this. In the vast of truth and consciousness and light, in felicity, in bliss. This is who we are. Children of immortality, as the Vedic rishis say. Let's dwell in this in aspiration.